welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. The morning sun cast long shadows across my bedroom floor as I silenced my 6 a.m. alarm. Tuesday, project presentation day. I'd been preparing for weeks to unveil the new Urban Sustainability Initiative to the City Council. A career-defining moment that required precision, control, and absolute competence. Qualities I'd built my reputation on as one of the city's leading infrastructure architects. I moved through my morning routine with practiced efficiency. 7 minutes for shower, 10 for grooming, 8 for dressing in my charcoal suit, and precisely 5 minutes to prepare and consume my protein shake while reviewing my presentation notes one final time. The schedule never varied. It didn't need to. Predictability bred excellence. Surface temperature anomalies in sectors 4 through 7. Read the text from Anthony, my project deputy. I frowned. The new sensors we'd installed throughout the downtown corridor had been acting up all week, reporting temperature fluctuations that made no sense given the weather patterns. Equipment calibration issue, clearly. I made a mental note to order a full diagnostic after the presentation. Recalibrate after installation period. Likely sensor adjustment phase. I texted back, setting my emptied glass in the sink with a satisfying clink against the porcelain. Outside, the city hummed with morning activity. As I walked the 11 blocks to City Hall, more efficient than driving and finding parking, I noted the maintenance crew working on a section of sidewalk near Westbrook Avenue. Everything all right? I asked, professional curiosity compelling me to stop briefly. The crew supervisor squinted up at me, wiping sweat from his brow despite the mild morning temperature. Just some strange warping, probably poor installation or maybe those heat waves last month. Nothing serious, I nodded, glancing down at the section they were replacing. The concrete did appear oddly distorted, almost as if it had started to warp under extreme heat. Interesting, but not my immediate concern. I'd circle back to it later, perhaps incorporate it into our infrastructure improvement proposals. City Hall buzzed with the usual bureaucratic energy as I set up my presentation in Conference Room B. Three-dimensional renderings, environmental impact assessments, cost projections, everything meticulously prepared. I'd rehearsed this presentation 17 times. It would go flawlessly. At 9:47 a.m., precisely 13 minutes into my presentation on adaptive urban materials, every phone in the room emitted the harsh, grating tone of an emergency alert. Faces around the conference table shifted from annoyed to confused as we all reached for our devices. Emergency alert. Surface instability detected in metro area. Exercise caution when traversing city surfaces. This is not a drill. An awkward silence followed, broken by nervous laughter. Someone's getting fired at emergency management, Councilwoman Porter said, shaking her head. Third false alarm this month. Probably testing a new system notification and sent it live instead of to their test environment, I offered, smoothly transitioning back to my presentation. As I was saying, the new polymer-infused concrete exhibits remarkable adaptive properties. The presentation concluded to approving nods and tentative budget commitments. Everything according to plan. As the room emptied, Councilman Davis paused beside me. That alert. Bit strange, wasn't it? Surface instability? What does that even mean? I shrugged. Vague emergency messaging. Probably meant for construction zones or maintenance crews. You know how these systems work. Better to over-alert than miss something critical. He seemed satisfied with that explanation, and so was I. Bureaucratic systems operated with their own peculiar logic, often disconnected from practical reality. As an architect who navigated those systems daily, I'd learned to translate between abstract policy and concrete implementation. The remainder of my day unfolded with comfortable predictability. 3 meetings, 2 site inspections, and 1 conference call with material suppliers. I left the office at 6:30 p.m., precisely on schedule. It wasn't until I was cooking dinner, seared salmon, steamed asparagus, brown rice, always on Tuesdays, that I noticed something odd. The kitchen floor beneath my feet felt different. Not dramatically so, but enough to register subconsciously. I paused, spatula in hand, and pressed my foot more deliberately against the tile. Was it warmer? Not hot, but definitely warmer than it should be. And there was something else. A subtle give to it, almost imperceptible, like standing on extremely dense memory foam rather than solid ceramic tile. I crouched down, touching the surface with my fingertips. The tile felt normal to the touch, cool, hard, unchanged from when I'd had it installed 3 years ago. I stood again, shifting my weight from foot to foot. There it was again, that strange, subtle yield. A fraction of a millimeter perhaps, but unmistakable. New eco-materials, I muttered to myself, returning to my cooking. The building had undergone some foundation work last month. They must have used one of those new flexible substrates designed to absorb seismic energy. Made sense. The city had updated building codes last year to require enhanced earthquake resistance. That would explain both the temperature difference and the subtle compression. After dinner, I opened my laptop to check email before bed. Another part of the routine. A news alert popped up on my screen. Minor pavement irregularities reported downtown. Official site heat expansion. My professional interest peaked. I clicked through to read. The article mentioned isolated incidents of unusual pavement deformation in the downtown business district, with city engineers attributing it to thermal expansion from recent temperature fluctuations. They assured the public that repairs were underway and there was no cause for concern. I thought of the crew I'd seen that morning. Nothing alarming, but interesting that it was happening in multiple locations. Perhaps our upcoming infrastructure project could address this more systematically. Improved expansion joints, better subsurface preparation. I made a note to discuss it with the team tomorrow. As I prepared for bed, teeth brushed for exactly 2 minutes, face washed, alarm set. The evening news played quietly in the background. The weather segment predicted unseasonably warm temperatures continuing through the week. And in other news, the anchor continued. City officials have responded to concerns about pavement conditions in several neighborhoods, stating that routine maintenance will address these issues within the week. Residents are advised to report any unusual ground conditions to the city's infrastructure hotline. I turned off the television, mentally filing away the information. Minor infrastructure issues were common in aging urban environments. Nothing that couldn't be addressed through proper engineering and maintenance protocols. As I settled into bed, my phone chimed one last time. A text from Anthony. Sensor data still showing anomalous readings. Some locations up 4 degrees from yesterday with no corresponding ambient temperature increase. Hardware issue. Run diagnostics in the morning. I typed back. Probably batch defects. We should have backups arriving Thursday. I set my phone on the nightstand and turned out the light, my mind already organizing tomorrow's tasks into neat, manageable categories. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything had a solution. That's what I'd built my career on. Understanding systems, identifying problems, implementing solutions. As I drifted toward sleep, I briefly recalled the strange give of my kitchen floor beneath my feet. Curiosity, nothing more. Probably just perception, or perhaps fatigue after a long day. Yet something about it lingered uncomfortably in my mind as consciousness faded. The memory of standing on something that should have been solid, but wasn't quite anymore. The sensor data made no sense. I frowned at my tablet, scrolling through the overnight readings from our monitoring network. Surface temperatures across downtown had risen an average of 2.3 degrees since yesterday, with isolated hotspots showing increases of up to 6 degrees. Yet the ambient air temperature remained consistent with seasonal norms. Equipment malfunction, I muttered, though with less conviction than yesterday. 17 sensors across different manufacturers, all showing similar anomalies. The statistical probability of simultaneous failure was vanishingly small. I told you something wasn't right, Anthony said, leaning against my office doorframe. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting he'd spent most of the night analyzing the same data. There are rational explanations, I replied, setting down my coffee. Underground utility work generating heat, new construction materials with different thermal properties, even geothermal activity. The city sits on an ancient fault line, after all. Anthony shook his head. I checked. No significant utility work in these areas. No recent repaving or material changes. And if this were geothermal, we'd be seeing steam vents, not just temperature increases. Something else is happening. I sighed. Anthony was brilliant but prone to catastrophizing. As project lead, I needed to maintain perspective. I'll schedule inspections of the hotspots. Seeing is believing. 2 hours later, I stood at the corner of 7th and Grandview, staring at an unremarkable stretch of sidewalk. According to our sensors, this section was running nearly 7 degrees above normal. I crouched, placing my palm against the concrete. It felt warm, not hot enough to burn, but noticeably warmer than concrete should be in 60-degree weather. More concerning was what I saw upon closer inspection. Subtle depressions in the surface, as if the material had yielded slightly under foot traffic. This was repaved last spring, I murmured, retrieving a small tool from my bag to test the surface hardness. The instrument showed readings consistent with properly cured concrete, yet the visual evidence suggested otherwise. As I continued my inspection, a jogger passed by, her footfalls leaving momentary impressions that rebounded slowly, like stepping on firm clay rather than solid concrete. She didn't seem to notice, her earbuds insulating her from the world as she continued her run. My phone buzzed. An email from the city's engineering department confirming no recent underground work in this area. Another explanation eliminated. Throughout the day, I inspected 5 more hotspots across downtown. Each told the same story. Imperceptibly softening surfaces, elevated temperatures, no visible cause. My rational mind grasped for explanations: microscopic material degradation, chemical contamination from road salt, even vibration damage from increased traffic. None quite fit the evidence. By mid-afternoon, I found myself on East Bank Drive, studying a section of roadway where the asphalt had developed a curious rippled texture, almost like fabric that had been gently rumpled. Seen the news? Anthony's voice came through my earpiece. I'd been updating him on my findings throughout the day. Been in the field. Why? They're reporting similar anomalies in 3 other districts now. Officials are blaming it on substandard materials from a recent supplier. I frowned. That's impossible. These affected areas used materials from different suppliers, installed years apart. Exactly. The concern in Anthony's voice was evident. Jane, whatever this is, it's spreading. I opened my mouth to offer another rational explanation, but was interrupted by the harsh blare of an emergency alert. All around me, people stopped mid-stride, reaching for their phones. Emergency alert. Avoid prolonged contact with ground surfaces in affected areas. Follow official guidance. More information to follow. Before I could process this, a clarification alert followed. The previous alert pertains to isolated areas with chemical residue from a minor industrial spill. Cleanup is underway. Normal activities may continue in unaffected areas. People resumed their activities, the brief moment of concern dispelled by the reassuring follow-up. But my architectural training made me more skeptical. The affected areas I'd inspected showed no signs of chemical spillage, no discoloration, no odor, no residue. As I drove back to the office, the car seemed to handle differently, subtle shifts in the road surface transmitting through the steering wheel. Was I imagining it? Hyper-aware after a day of inspections? Or was the phenomenon more widespread than our sensors indicated? We need to expand our monitoring network, I told Anthony when I returned, and pull historical temperature data for the past 6 months. I want to know when this started and how it's progressing. He nodded, already typing. I've been thinking, what if it's not just surface material? What if something's happening underneath? Substrate changes could explain the temperature increases and softening. It was a reasonable hypothesis. Get me access to the geological survey data from last year, and see if we can borrow ground-penetrating radar from the university. The remainder of the afternoon disappeared into data analysis. The pattern was undeniable. Surface temperatures had begun rising 3 months ago, initially so gradually that weekly fluctuations masked the trend. The progression followed no obvious pattern related to geography, material type, or installation date. You're going to think I'm crazy, Anthony said as evening approached. But what if it's not a what but a who? What if someone is doing this deliberately? I raised an eyebrow. To what end? And how would anyone modify concrete and asphalt at a molecular level across disconnected city sections? He shrugged. Just considering all possibilities. My evening run usually cleared my mind, establishing order from chaos. Today, it only deepened my unease. My familiar route through Riverside Park felt subtly wrong. The paved path had developed almost imperceptible undulations, as if the ground beneath was shifting in slow motion. More disturbing was the texture. Slightly tacky, offering just a bit more traction than it should. I found myself constantly looking down, analyzing each section I traversed. About 2 miles in, I encountered a section where the path dipped slightly, creating what appeared to be a shallow bowl approximately 3 feet in diameter. It hadn't been there last week. I circled it cautiously, noting how the edges curved gently downward, defying the path's original engineering. My analytical mind struggled for explanations. Subsidence from water erosion, shifting soil from root growth. Neither explained the uniform nature of the depression or why the material remained intact rather than cracking. I completed my run in record time, eager to shower away the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. At home, I immediately noticed the kitchen floor again. The subtle give I'd detected yesterday was unmistakably more pronounced today. I conducted an impromptu test, dropping a marble onto the tile. Instead of the sharp click and roll I expected, the marble landed with a muted tap and stopped almost immediately, as if the surface had absorbed its momentum. The news offered little reassurance. Between vague statements about isolated infrastructure anomalies and precautionary inspections, officials projected calm while providing no substantive explanations. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with another emergency alert. Precautionary notice. Elevated sleeping arrangements recommended in affected districts. Consult local guidance for determination of risk levels. No clarification followed this time. I stared at my phone, then at my bed sitting directly on the floor. For the first time in years, I deviated from my routine, pulling the mattress onto the box spring's higher platform instead of leaving it on the low platform bed frame I preferred. Just being cautious, I told myself, even as I wondered if the floor beneath me might be imperceptibly changing as I slept. I couldn't sleep last night. The recurring emergency alerts kept buzzing my phone, always with that same vague warning about elevated sleeping arrangements recommended for resident comfort. What does that even mean? The city's been sending these cryptic messages for 3 days now, each one slightly rewording the same bizarre advice without explanation. My name is Jane Chun, and until recently, my biggest concern was securing approval for the downtown corridor revitalization project. As an urban architect specializing in sustainable infrastructure, I've spent 15 years studying how cities function from the ground up. So when I stepped outside this morning to find a perfectly circular sinkhole, approximately 6 feet in diameter, directly in front of my apartment building's entrance, my professional curiosity immediately overshadowed any alarm. That wasn't there yesterday, Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, said as she stood beside me at a cautious distance from the edge. The maintenance man put those cones around it about an hour ago. The sinkhole wasn't particularly deep, maybe 4 feet, but something about it seemed wrong. The edges weren't ragged as you'd expect from a typical substructure collapse. They were smooth, almost polished, as if the pavement had been precisely carved away. Or melted. Did anyone call the city? I asked, already pulling out my phone to take photos. They said they've got crews working all over. Low priority since it's not in the street. She huffed. Low priority until someone falls in and breaks their neck. At work, I couldn't focus on my presentation for the Urban Planning Committee. Instead, I pulled up the city's infrastructure maintenance database. I still had access from our last municipal project and began searching for recent sinkhole reports. What I found disturbed me. Over the past week, there had been 147 reported incidents of ground subsidence across the metro area. The typical monthly average was 8. Even more concerning, they weren't following the usual pattern of occurring along water or sewage lines. You looking at the whole reports too? Anthony appeared beside my desk, coffee in hand. Anthony Okafor was our firm's geotechnical specialist, brilliant but always slightly alarmist about structural anomalies. I'd dismissed his concerns earlier this week about unusual readings from our monitoring equipment at the Westside development. Now I wasn't so sure. Did you see how they're categorizing them? He continued, leaning closer to my screen. They've created a new classification code, Type E subsidence. I called my contact at Public Works. She wouldn't tell me what the E stands for, but she did say they've been told not to discuss these incidents with the public. That seems excessive for some sinkholes, I said, scrolling through the data. Though this distribution pattern is strange. They're appearing in clusters, then new clusters form elsewhere. That's not how ground subsidence typically progresses. Anthony lowered his voice. Jane, have you noticed anything weird about the ground? Anywhere. The oddly warm, slightly soft feel of my kitchen floor flashed through my mind. I'd convinced myself it was just the new eco-friendly materials settling. Maybe, I admitted. Why? Gene went out to check some unusual readings at the Parkview site yesterday afternoon. He never came back to the office. He's not answering calls. When I checked with Parkview security, they have no record of him arriving, but his car is in their visitor lot. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Gene Wong was our most methodical colleague, reliable to a fault. Did you report it? Of course. Police said they can't file a missing persons report until 48 hours have passed. Anthony took a drink of his coffee but grimaced like it tasted wrong. Something's happening, Jane. The official reports are saying these are isolated incidents caused by the heavy rains last month, but the pattern doesn't match water erosion. My phone buzzed with another emergency alert. Citizens are advised to inspect ground surfaces before prolonged standing. Report unusual textures to municipal services. I found myself standing up, suddenly uncomfortable with the solid floor beneath my feet. I need to check something. In the materials testing lab downstairs, I located our thermal imaging equipment and portable hardness tester. Nobody questioned me. As project lead, I had access to whatever I needed. Back at my apartment that evening, I methodically began scanning my floors. The thermal imaging showed exactly what I feared. Irregular heat patterns throughout my kitchen and bathroom floors, with the warmest spots measuring nearly 5 degrees above normal. The hardness test was even more concerning. Areas that should have registered at least 7th on the Mohs scale were coming in at 5.2 to 6.1, significantly softer than standard residential flooring materials. I sat on my couch, staring at the data readouts while the evening news played in the background. A reporter was interviewing a city spokesperson about isolated pavement anomalies, with reassurances that repair crews were addressing all concerns. Behind them, I could see workers in standard construction gear, not the hazmat suits I would expect if there were chemical contamination involved. My couch suddenly felt unsafe. I ran my hand over the floor beneath it, noticeably warmer than it should be. On an impulse, I moved my mattress into the center of the living room, away from all walls, and stacked my suitcases beneath it to elevate it about 18 inches. A literal interpretation of elevated sleeping arrangements. Sleep didn't come easily. Around 2 a.m., another alert: temporary closure of downtown sectors 5 to 8 due to emergency maintenance. Seek alternate routes until further notice. Those sectors included our office building. I called Anthony immediately, surprising myself with my urgency. "You seeing this?" I asked when he answered, his voice alert despite the hour. "Yeah, they're shutting down the whole financial district. Official reason is water main repairs, but I've got a friend in emergency services. He says they've lost contact with 3 maintenance workers who were inspecting a subsidence report near the First National Building." Lost contact how? He wouldn't say exactly, just that they couldn't be reached or located. "Jane, remember those core samples we took from the West Side project last week? I've been running additional tests. The molecular structure of the concrete has changed." "Changed how?" "That's not possible. I don't know how to explain it. It's like the binding properties are slowly releasing. The solid state is becoming less solid. I've never seen anything like it." A heavy thud from my bathroom interrupted my response. Heart racing, I approached the closed door. "Anthony, hang on." When I opened the door, I found my sink had partially detached from the wall, hanging at an angle toward the floor. But it wasn't broken. The porcelain was intact. It had simply sagged, as if it were softening like warm wax. "I need to send you something," I whispered, taking a photo and sending it to Anthony. "Is this like what you're seeing in the samples?" His long pause was answer enough. Finally, "Jane, don't touch it. Don't touch any of it. I'm coming over." As I waited for Anthony, another emergency alert lit up my phone. "Do not attempt TO repair structural anomalies. Professional assessment required for all surface irregularities. Temporary shelters available at designated elevated locations." I stared at the message, then at my elevated mattress in the living room. For the first time, true fear began to replace professional curiosity. Whatever was happening to the city's infrastructure wasn't a series of isolated incidents or maintenance issues. It was systematic, spreading, and being deliberately downplayed by authorities. The floor beneath my feet, beneath all our feet, was no longer something I could take for granted. And if I couldn't trust the ground itself, what certainties remained? I woke to Anthony shaking my shoulder. I must have fallen asleep on my elevated mattress island while waiting for him. "How did you get in?" I mumbled, disoriented. "Your door was unlocked. Jane, we need to go. Now." The grim determination in his voice jolted me fully awake. "What time is it?" "Almost 5 a.m. I've been trying different routes to get here since we spoke. Most of downtown is inaccessible." I sat up, noticing he carried a backpack and what looked like scientific equipment. "Inaccessible how?" "Roads blocked, subway stations closed. They're calling it preventative maintenance, but it's containment. Look." He showed me his phone. Videos taken from his car window showing streets cordoned off with military-grade barriers. Personnel in unmarked uniforms directing traffic away from the financial district. "I'm taking samples from your bathroom," he said, already moving toward it. "Then we're getting out of the city." I followed, still processing. "Out of the city? Anthony, I have presentations next week. We can't just..." My words died as I entered the bathroom. During the few hours I'd slept, my sink had completely detached from the wall and now rested at an impossible angle, sunken partially into the floor. The porcelain remained intact but distorted, as if the bottom had melted and fused with the floor tiles. "This is advancing faster than I calculated," Anthony muttered, already taking samples with specialized tools. "The molecular destabilization is accelerating." "In English, please." He straightened, fixing me with a stare. "Things that should be solid aren't staying solid, and the effect is spreading." My analytical mind immediately sought explanations. A new chemical agent? Some kind of corrosive pollutant in the groundwater. If only it were that simple. He carefully sealed his samples in specialized containers. Whatever this is, it doesn't match any known chemical reaction. It's almost like the fundamental properties of matter are being rewritten. My phone buzzed with another alert. Mandatory evacuation. Sectors 1 to 12. Use only designated exit routes. Do not attempt private vehicle evacuation. Registration required at checkpoint stations. I scanned the map attached to the alert. The evacuation zone now encompassed nearly a third of the city, including my apartment. See? They know, Anthony said, but they're controlling the evacuation to manage panic. We need to leave before the routes get jammed. As I hastily packed essentials, 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Where would we even go? If this is affecting the city's infrastructure, my sister has a cabin about 70 miles north. Rural area, different groundwater system, different soil composition. If this is geographically contained, we should be safe there. Should be. The uncertainty in those words wasn't reassuring. Outside, the early morning had an eerie quality, unnaturally quiet with occasional distant sirens. The sinkhole in front of my building had grown several feet wider overnight. As we approached Anthony's car, I noticed something else. The pavement around the sinkhole wasn't cracked as normal subsidence would cause. Instead, the edges curved downward smoothly, as if the asphalt had simply flowed toward the center. The drive out of the city quickly became a nightmare. Main thoroughfares were choked with emergency vehicles and barricades. Side streets that should have provided alternatives were either closed or congested with others having the same idea. After an hour, we'd moved less than 2 miles. This isn't working, I said, checking the increasingly frantic emergency alerts on my phone. Each one contradicted the last. Some routes opened while others closed, seemingly at random. Maybe we should go back and follow the official evacuation procedures. Anthony's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I don't trust the official procedures. Gene followed protocols when he went to check those readings. Now he's gone. A troubling thought occurred to me. Anthony, what if this isn't contained to our city? What if we're just seeing it first because of population density or infrastructure age? Before he could answer, traffic ahead came to a complete standstill. People began abandoning their vehicles, grabbing belongings and continuing on foot. Anthony pulled onto the shoulder. Something's happening up ahead. We exited the car, joining the flow of people moving cautiously forward to see. About 100 yards ahead, the highway simply ended. Not from damage or collapse. The asphalt gradually transitioned into something else, something that rippled slightly in the morning breeze. Like the road had turned to thick, viscous tar. Emergency workers were creating a perimeter, ushering people back. One woman was screaming hysterically as paramedics attended to her. I caught fragments, just stepped onto it, thought it was water, pulled her back but her shoe. A municipal bus had partially driven onto the affected area before stopping. Its front tires were now visibly sinking, the asphalt slowly enveloping them like quicksand. The driver was frantically evacuating passengers from the rear exit. "We need another route," Anthony said, pulling me back toward the car. "Let's try the bridge." As we retreated, my phone lit up with an emergency broadcast. All bridge crossings now closed. Proceed to designated airlift evacuation points. Remain elevated whenever possible. Anthony drove us to the nearest designated evacuation point, the upper levels of a shopping mall parking structure about a mile away. Hundreds of people were already gathered, with military helicopters periodically landing to take small groups away. "This could take days," I said, surveying the crowd. "We don't have another option. At least we're elevated here." The word triggered something in my mind. "Anthony, I need to check something. Give me your analysis kit." We found a quiet corner of the parking structure where I could set up the portable equipment. Taking core samples from different areas of the concrete floor, I ran quick field analyses. The results confirmed my suspicion. "Look at this." I showed him the readouts. The molecular cohesion is strongest on this level 8 stories up. As we took samples from lower floors, the numbers declined consistently. The closer to ground level, the more advanced the whatever this is. Anthony frowned at the data. It's coming from below then, not airborne, not waterborne. A commotion nearby drew our attention. A woman was pointing at the ground where a small puddle had formed despite the clear skies. Around the puddle, the concrete had a strange, almost sweating appearance. "Nobody touch it!" a National Guard officer ordered, quickly cordoning off the area. "Hazmat team to level 8, Section C." He spoke into his radio. I found myself backing away, suddenly hyper-aware of the ground beneath my feet. For the first time, my scientific curiosity was fully eclipsed by primitive fear. The structure we stood on, like every building, every road, every foundation, all of it depended on the fundamental certainty that solid materials remain solid. As people murmured anxiously around us, pressing toward the helicopter landing area, I realized why the evacuation was being conducted by air. Whatever was happening wasn't just affecting specific materials or locations. It was coming for everything that touched the ground. My phone vibrated with another alert. This one was different. No instructions, no reassurances, just a stark warning. Phenomenon spreading beyond containment zones. Maintain elevation. Await further instructions. Anthony and I exchanged glances as the implications sank in. The authorities had lost control of the situation. Perhaps they had never had it. "Jane," Anthony said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that there's nowhere to evacuate to." I stared at the horizon, at the city I'd helped design and build, now being unmade by forces I couldn't comprehend. For an architect, someone who stakes their professional identity on understanding how structures stand and endure, nothing could be more terrifying than watching the very ground beneath everything simply decide to stop being solid. And I was beginning to suspect this was just the beginning. The catastrophe on Westridge Boulevard unfolded during my morning commute. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand, but the videos spread faster than the authorities could contain them. A 4-lane road suddenly rippling like water, cars sinking chassis deep before drivers could react. People scrambling from vehicles only to find the sidewalks softening beneath their feet, clinging to lampposts that held firm for precious moments before they too began to tilt and sink. 43 people consumed by what was, hours earlier, perfectly solid asphalt. The official death toll would later be revised to 38, as if that somehow made it better. I sat in my office at the Urban Development Commission, watching the footage loop on every screen, my coffee growing cold. The way the concrete moved, it was almost beautiful in its fluid motion, if you could forget what it meant, what it had done. "Chan!" My supervisor's voice cut through my horrified trance. "Emergency meeting. Now." The conference room was chaos when I arrived. Raised voices, frantic gesturing at monitors displaying maps of the city overlaid with red pinpoints. "Too many red pinpoints. It's accelerating," announced Commissioner Harding, his usual bureaucratic composure shattered. "Whatever this phenomenon is, the progression has shifted from linear to exponential." A junior engineer spoke up. "We still don't understand the mechanism. The samples show normal composition until they just don't. The molecular structure changes state without temperature increase." I added, finding my voice. "It defies everything we know about material physics." "Save the scientific discourse for later," Harding snapped. "Right now we need containment strategies. Chun, your district is showing the highest concentration of incidents. What are your recommendations?" I opened my mouth to speak and realized I had nothing. No recommendations, no solutions. Nothing in my 15 years of architectural engineering had prepared me for streets that melted like wax. "We need to," I began, then stopped as my phone vibrated with an emergency alert. Every device in the room sounded simultaneously. "Emergency alert. Mandatory evacuation in effect for districts 7, 10, and 12. Ground instability hazard. Proceed immediately to designated assembly points. Do not delay. Do not attempt to salvage belongings. District 12. My district. My apartment. I have to go." I said, already moving toward the door. Nobody tried to stop me. Several others were grabbing their things too. Outside, the city had transformed in the hours since I'd arrived at work. Streets that had been bustling with morning traffic were eerily empty. Barricades blocked major intersections, manned by police in unfamiliar protective gear. Something about their boots, thicker soles, wider bases, adapted for the changing terrain. I bypassed the main streets, taking alleys and side roads where I could. The pavement felt different underfoot. Not obviously soft, but lacking the unyielding solidity that we take for granted. Like walking on extremely firm clay rather than concrete. I found myself testing each step before committing my weight, moving with the careful deliberation of someone crossing thin ice. 3 blocks from my apartment, I encountered a cordoned area where the sidewalk had sagged into a gentle bowl shape. A worker in hazmat gear was taking readings with an instrument I didn't recognize. "Is it safe to pass?" I called out. He looked up, startled. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am. This area's restricted. I live in the Westridge Towers. I need to get some things before evacuation." He hesitated, then gestured toward a narrow path. "Stay on the marked route. Don't stop. Don't touch any surfaces you don't have to." The lobby of my building was empty except for the security guard, who looked relieved to see another human. "Ms. Chan, they're evacuating the building. Lower floors first." "What floor are they on now?" "3rd and 4th. You're on 17, right? You've got maybe an hour." The elevator was offline. "Safety precaution," the guard explained. So I took the stairs, my legs burning by the 10th floor. I paused to catch my breath and noticed how the stairwell felt different from this morning. The solid concrete steps now had a subtle give like dense memory foam. My apartment door stuck slightly when I unlocked it, requiring a harder push than usual. Inside, everything looked normal, but the floor wasn't right. The hardwood planks remained visually unchanged, but walking across them felt like traversing a waterbed with very little water. A subtle undulation following my footsteps. Working quickly, I filled a backpack with essentials, clothes, medications, important documents, my external hard drive. As I moved through the rooms, I noted how the floor's softness varied. The living room was barely noticeable, but my bedroom had sunk almost an inch, creating a visible depression. My phone rang. "Anthony, Jane, where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm at my apartment, grabbing some things before evacuation." "Get out now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "The Westridge Foundation is showing critical instability. The whole building could go." As if summoned by his warning, the building's emergency system blared to life. "Attention all residents. Immediate evacuation required. Proceed to emergency exits." This is not a drill. The floor lurched beneath me, not violently, but with the unmistakable movement of something that should never move. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the door just as another shift sent a lamp crashing to the floor. The hallway was filling with confused residents. Some were still trying to pack belongings, arguing with building security who urged them to leave immediately. I joined the flow toward the emergency stairs, trying not to think about 17 flights down through a stairwell that was already showing signs of instability. We made it down 8 floors before we felt it. A slow, sickening tilt as the entire building shifted. Screams echoed in the stairwell. The concrete walls groaned like a living thing. "Keep moving!" shouted a firefighter who had appeared from somewhere below. "Steady pace, don't run." For more floors. The staircase was visibly warped now, steps no longer level. Someone ahead of me stumbled, and I helped them up, feeling the surface beneath us continue to deform. 2 more floors. We could see daylight through the exit door below, people streaming out. The building gave another shudder. Chunks of plaster fell from the ceiling, and then we were outside, herded to a safe distance as the Westridge Towers, where I'd lived for 6 years, slowly, impossibly, began to sink into the earth. Not collapsing, not crumbling, but sinking like a ship taking on water, the lower floors disappearing as the ground around them liquefied. I found myself in the parking lot of a grocery store several blocks away, designated as an emergency assembly point. Hundreds of displaced people milled about, many still in shock. Aid workers distributed water and information about temporary shelters. "Jane!" Anthony pushed through the crowd, relief washing over his face when he saw me. He pulled me into a tight hug. "Thank God," I thought. "When I saw the buildings going down, I got out in time," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Anthony, what's happening? Really happening? All the official explanations are falling apart faster than the streets." He glanced around, then led me to a quieter corner of the lot. From his messenger bag, he pulled a tablet and showed me a map of the city overlaid with timestamp data points. "I've been tracking all reported incidents and mapping them against subsurface features. Look at the pattern. The distribution wasn't random as it had first appeared. The affected areas formed a spiral pattern expanding outward from multiple points of origin. This isn't chemical contamination or structural failure," Anthony said quietly. "The transformation is spreading beneath the entire city in a mathematically consistent pattern, and it's accelerating." He showed me another screen, microscopic images of my own samples, but with time-lapse tracking I hadn't done. The molecular changes aren't static. They're active, ongoing. The transformed material is, I don't even have the right word for it. It's not just changing state, it's changing properties, becoming something else entirely. My phone vibrated again. Another emergency alert. Emergency broadcast. Containment efforts in sectors 3 to 7 have failed. All residents must proceed to evacuation routes immediately. Do not attempt to use unapproved pathways. Follow emergency personnel directions. The message was followed by garbled text and symbols that made no sense. Corruption in the emergency alert system itself. In the distance, sirens wailed continuously. A military helicopter thundered overhead, flying low enough to make the air vibrate around us. And beneath our feet, I knew with growing certainty something fundamental was changing. Not just in our city, but in reality itself. 3 days after the evacuation, I stood with Anthony on the rooftop of the University Science Center, watching what used to be the financial district transform below us. Through the spotting scope, I could see entire city blocks surrendering to the phenomenon, elegant skyscrapers warping like candles left in the sun, streets rippling with slow, almost deliberate movement. 16th and Meridian just went, Anthony said, making a note on his tablet. That's 3 blocks further than yesterday at this time. I adjusted the scope to focus on an intersection where emergency workers were attempting to create a barrier using some kind of chemical solidifier. Even from this distance, I could see it wasn't working. The specialized equipment they'd brought in sat half-submerged in what should have been solid concrete. "They're still thinking about this as a chemical problem," I said. "Something that can be neutralized or contained. Because the alternative is unthinkable," Anthony replied. We'd been granted access to the university facilities thanks to Dr. Abernathy, the materials science professor who had taken interest in my samples. The lab had become our base of operations since neither of us had homes to return to anymore. Anthony's apartment building had succumbed the day after mine. The door to the roof slammed open, and Dr. Abernathy burst through, her usual composed demeanor shattered. "You need to see this," she said, breathing hard. Right now, in the main laboratory, a team of researchers clustered around a sealed observation chamber. Inside, separated from us by thick glass, a cube of concrete approximately 1 foot on each side sat on a metal stand. Embedded in the concrete were sensors and monitoring equipment. "This is a control sample taken from outside the affected zone," Dr. Abernathy explained. "Completely normal structural concrete, tested and verified." On a large monitor, various readings displayed the sample's temperature, density, resonance, and other properties I wasn't familiar with. "Watch," she said, tapping a command into the control panel. A small mechanical arm inside the chamber moved forward, placing a tiny amount of material, no larger than a pea, onto the concrete block. "That's processed material from the affected zone," she explained. We've tried to neutralize it through every method we can think of. Extreme heat, radiation, chemical treatment. Nothing stops it. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the spot where the material had been placed darkened. As we watched, the darkening spread outward in a perfect circle. Within minutes, the entire top surface of the concrete block had changed color, becoming slightly reflective, like wet stone. "It's transforming the sample," I whispered. Dr. Abernathy nodded grimly. "It's not just transforming it, it's converting it. The process is microscopic but spreading at an accelerating rate. The affected material serves as a catalyst for further transformation." A researcher monitoring the readings spoke up. "Molecular bonds shifting, density decreasing by 5%, now 8%, 12%. Before our eyes, the solid concrete block began to deform, the edges softening first, then the entire structure starting to slump like melting ice cream. Within 20 minutes, what had been a solid cube was now a glistening, semi-liquid mound that continued to spread across the bottom of the chamber. "My God," Anthony breathed. "There's more," Dr. Abernathy said, her voice tight. She motioned us to another workstation where a researcher sat examining microscopic images. "This is the transformed material under an electron microscope," she said. "Notice anything unusual about the molecular structure?" I studied the images. The material appeared to be organizing itself into repeating patterns that seemed vaguely familiar but unlike any crystalline structure I'd studied. "It looks almost biological," I said finally. "Precisely, but not like any biology we're familiar with. These structures are reconfiguring the basic properties of matter at the atomic level. We're not just seeing a state change from solid to liquid, we're seeing matter being reprogrammed." The implications were staggering. This wasn't a contamination or a chemical reaction. It was a fundamental transformation of physical reality itself. My phone buzzed with another emergency alert. "Emergency broadcast. The National Science Advisory has determined that the metropolitan surface anomaly represents a novel material state. All citizens must avoid direct contact with affected surfaces. Exposure may result in irreversible tissue alteration." "They finally stopped lying," Anthony muttered, reading over my shoulder. A commotion from the hallway interrupted us. Shouting, the sound of equipment crashing. One of the security guards rushed in. "Dr. Abernathy, we have a situation in the East Wing. Someone's contaminated." We followed her at a run, through corridors now populated with makeshift cots and displaced researchers who had taken refuge in the university. The security guard led us to a small materials testing lab where a cluster of people stood at a safe distance from a man seated on the floor. It was Dr. Kelvin, one of Anthony's colleagues. His right leg was extended in front of him, and he was staring at it with an expression of horrified fascination. His foot and ankle had partially sunk into the floor, but that wasn't the worst part. Where his shoe and lower pant leg made contact with the transformed surface, the distinction between human and non-human matter was blurring. "I was testing the sample," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I thought the protective gear was sufficient." "Don't move," Dr. Abernathy ordered, though it was clearly unnecessary. Kelvin couldn't have withdrawn his foot if he tried. It had become part of the floor. "It doesn't hurt," he said with detached curiosity. "I can feel it, though. The floor. I can feel it as if it's part of me." "We need to get him out," someone said. "How?" Another voice responded. "Cut through the floor? That would just spread it faster." I moved closer, crouching to examine the junction where Kelvin's body met the transformed surface. The material of the floor had the same subtle sheen we'd observed in the lab sample, but here at the interface with living tissue, it seemed to pulse with an almost imperceptible rhythm. "Can you still feel your toes?" I asked. Kelvin nodded. "Yes, but differently. Like they're there but also extended. I can feel vibrations through the building's foundation. It's..." His eyes widened. "It's incredible." "Jane, step back," Anthony warned, pulling at my arm. but I was transfixed by what I was seeing. The transformation wasn't consuming Kelvin in a destructive sense. It was incorporating him, and judging by his expression, shifting now from fear to wonder, the experience was becoming less terrifying to him by the moment. "I can feel the whole building," Kelvin whispered. "All the floors, the walls, and beyond that." His voice took on a note of awe. "I can feel the street outside, the transformed areas connecting to the sewer system, the subway tunnels. It's all connected, all changing, all becoming something new." An emergency team arrived with isolation equipment, but it was already clear their efforts would be futile. Kelvin's transformation had progressed to his knee, the line between body and floor now completely indistinguishable. "Don't worry about me," he told his horrified colleagues with an eerie smile. "I understand now. This isn't destruction, it's evolution. We're not losing our world. We're joining with it." As they ushered us out of the room, I caught a final glimpse of Kelvin. His expression was one of perfect peace as his body continued its gradual merge with the floor. The sight would haunt my dreams for whatever nights I had left in which the ground remained solid enough to sleep on. Back in the main lab, the emergency broadcast system crackled to life on all available screens and speakers. "Emergency directive. The phenomenon affecting urban surfaces has been classified as a transmaterial event beyond current scientific understanding. All attempts at containment have failed. Remaining residents must evacuate to designated safe zones. This may be our final broadcast from this facility." Anthony and I exchanged glances. We both knew the truth now. There would be no containment, no solution, no return to normalcy. The world as we knew it, solid, reliable, obeying the physical laws we'd built our civilization upon, was quite literally melting away beneath our feet. I've lost track of how many days it's been since the city center liquefied. Time blurs when your concept of solid ground becomes metaphorical. The military has established a perimeter along Highland Avenue, which they insist is holding. I know better. Nothing is holding. From my vantage point on the roof of the half-abandoned Westmore Research Building, I can see the new topography of downtown. Once rigid skyscrapers now curved like melting candles, streets rippling with slow-motion fluidity. The cityscape resembles a Dali painting rendered in 3 dimensions. My radio crackles with static before Dr. Whitmore's voice breaks through. "Chun, are you getting these readings?" I check my tablet, the screen displaying real-time data from the sensors we planted yesterday. The transformation front is advancing approximately 4.3 meters per hour, twice the rate we recorded just 2 days ago. "I see it," I respond, throat tight. The acceleration curve matches our projections. "We're running out of time." There's a pause before she adds, "The task force is meeting in 20 minutes. Bunker C, the emergency task force, what a joke. A desperate collection of civil engineers, physicists, and military personnel trying to make sense of something that defies comprehension. Yet here I am, still clinging to the delusion that my architectural expertise might somehow matter against the literal dissolution of reality. As I pack up my equipment, my phone buzzes with the now familiar vibration pattern of an emergency alert. The screen flashes, "Emergency alert, 7:43, protocol bedrock activated. All residents in zones 3 to 7 relocate to designated hardpoints. Follow military escort only. Do not attempt self-evacuation. Maintain elevated position when stationary. Protocol bedrock." The irony isn't lost on me. There's nothing solid about our situation. I've learned from a National Guard lieutenant that the protocol wasn't designed for this specific scenario. It was adapted from procedures for massive geological instability. The military is improvising just like the rest of us. The journey to Bunker C requires crossing 3 blocks of increasingly unstable terrain. I take the emergency stairwell down to the 4th floor, avoiding the lower levels where the building has already begun to sink. The staircase itself seems reliable, though I've learned not to trust appearances. Yesterday, a concrete support column on the west wing liquefied without warning, despite sensor readings indicating stability. 2 National Guard soldiers escort me across the makeshift bridge spanning 5th Street. Below us, what was once asphalt now resembles thick molasses, occasionally bubbling as if boiling underwater. The once familiar city sounds have been replaced by an unsettling chorus, distant sirens, evacuation announcements, and a constant low groan emanating from stressed architectural materials fighting a losing battle against transformation. Inside Bunker C, actually the reinforced basement of the former Federal Reserve Building, the task force has gathered around a large digital map table. The holographic display shows the city with color-coded overlays indicating transformation stages. Over half the map glows deep red. Colonel Hayes acknowledges my arrival with a grim nod. Ms. Chun, good timing. Dr. Levine was just explaining the results from yesterday's sonic barrier test. Dr. Levine, a geophysicist with permanent shadows under his eyes, manipulates the display to show a cross-section of the experimental barrier we deployed along River Street. The resonance frequencies initially appeared to create a stabilizing effect. He explains, his voice flat with exhaustion. For approximately 43 minutes, the transformation front halted at the barrier line. A spark of hope, quickly extinguished. Then this happened. He advances the simulation. The barrier doesn't just fail. It catalyzes a violent acceleration, the transformation front surging forward at nearly 15 meters per hour. Jesus, someone mutters. Colonel Hayes slams his fist on the table. So we made it worse. We've been approaching this all wrong. I say, an idea forming as I study the simulation. The frequencies didn't fail, they changed the pattern. Look here. I point to the wave formations in the data. The resonance created a harmonic relationship with the transformation. Dr. Whitmore leans forward. You're suggesting we could potentially control the direction or shape of the transformation. Even if we can't stop it, it's worth exploring, I insist. If we can't prevent it, maybe we can channel it away from evacuation routes. For the next hour, we develop a desperate plan to deploy modified sonic emitters along the western evacuation corridor, the last viable route out of the city center. As we finalize the arrangements, Anthony stumbles into the bunker, his face ashen. I haven't seen him since his accident 3 days ago, when his kitchen floor partially consumed his right leg before soldiers pulled him free. The doctors said he was lucky. Others who made contact with transformed surfaces weren't as fortunate. They're lying to us, he says without preamble. About everything. Colonel Hayes signals to a soldier who moves closer to Anthony. Dr. Bennett, you should be in medical. Anthony ignores him, his eyes finding mine. Jane, the transformation, it's not random. It's not a chemical reaction or radiation or any of the theories they're feeding us. He struggles for words. It's communicating. The room falls silent. Dr. Whitmore glances nervously at Colonel Hayes. When I was caught in it, Anthony continues, I felt something. Presence. Patterns. Intelligence. That's enough, Dr. Bennett. Colonel Hayes interrupts. Medical staff reported you might experience hallucinations from the trauma and medication. Show them. Anthony demands, limping toward the map table. Show them the global pattern analysis. The colonel's jaw tightens. That information is classified under Protocol Bedrock. Something cold settles in my stomach. What global pattern? Before anyone can respond, the bunker's emergency systems activate. Red lights rotate as an automated voice announces, Alert! Structural integrity compromised. Evacuate immediately. Alert! Structural integrity. The floor trembles. Not the violent shake of an earthquake, but something more insidious. A subtle softening beneath our feet. Everyone out! Colonel Hayes shouts. To the roof. Move! In the chaos of evacuation, Anthony grabs my arm. Find the frequency data from Monterey and Lagos. Same pattern. Same timing. This isn't isolated, Jane. It's coordinated. A soldier pulls him away before I can respond. We rush upward through emergency routes, passing floors where the transformation has already begun. The walls themselves seem to breathe, subtle undulations visible if you look closely enough. When we reach the roof, helicopters are already descending for extraction. My phone buzzes with another alert. Emergency alert. 917. Protocol bedrock escalation. Immediate evacuation of zones 1 to 9. Follow extraction protocol. No personal items. Remain elevated. Do not seek family members. Proceed directly to aircraft. As I'm ushered toward a helicopter, I glimpse the horizon beyond the city. In the distance, the landscape undulates like waves on water. Miles of terrain no longer behaving as solid matter should. The scope of what we're facing hits me anew. This isn't just our city. This is everywhere. The helicopter lifts off, and I watch the Westmore Research Building begin to sink into itself. Below us, the evacuation routes we so carefully planned are already closing. The sonic emitters we pinned our hopes on sit untested in the back of military trucks now abandoned on softening streets. My tablet chimes with an incoming file, transferred remotely from Anthony's device. Despite the chaos, my scientific curiosity compels me to open it. The screen fills with comparative data from transformation events worldwide. Lagos, Monterey, Singapore, all showing identical pattern frequencies with precise timing offsets. This isn't random. This isn't an accident. As the helicopter banks away from the dissolving city, I understand with terrible clarity that our desperate measures were never going to work. We've been thinking far too small. The transformation isn't a disaster to be contained. It's a process to be completed. The military outpost at Mount Crescent was never meant to house civilians. Designed as a communications relay station, it's now crammed with scientists, military personnel, and the handful of strategic assets evacuated from the city center. I'm only here because Colonel Hayes designated me essential personnel after seeing Anthony's data. 3 days since the helicopter evacuation, and I still can't process what I witnessed during our flight over the remains of downtown. Office towers half submerged in what used to be solid ground, highways rippling like ribbons in water, entire neighborhoods transformed into an undulating landscape that defied classification. Not quite liquid, not quite solid. Something else entirely. You need to see this, Dr. Whitmore says, appearing at my makeshift workstation. Dark circles shadow her eyes. None of us have slept properly in days. She slides a tablet across to me, displaying classified satellite imagery. These were taken 6 hours apart, she explains as I swipe through the images. The transformation zone isn't just spreading, it's forming patterns. From this aerial perspective, the liquefied regions are organizing into intricate geometric configurations that remind me of complex mathematical fractals or biological structures. This isn't chaotic, I murmur. There's organization here. Exactly. And it's not just our city. She taps the screen, bringing up a global map. Red indicators show active transformation zones across 6 continents. The pattern recognition software found identical geometric progressions at every site. They're all growing in harmony. A cold realization settles in my chest. Anthony was right. There's more. Her voice drops lower. The Pentagon granted me access to their complete dataset. This phenomenon has precedent, minor incidents dating back decades. Small-scale liquefaction events dismissed as industrial accidents or geological anomalies. It's been building up to this. I say, understanding dawning, testing, preparing. Before she can respond, an announcement echoes through the facility. Rescue team volunteers report to Hangar B. Repeat, rescue team volunteers to Hangar B. Dr. Whitmore gives me a pointed look. They're still trying to extract people from Highland Memorial Hospital. The transformation reached the lower floors this morning. That's suicide, I say, but I'm already standing, gathering my equipment. Perhaps this is madness, but I need to see the transformation zone up close again. Need to understand. The hospital stands like an island in a glistening sea of transformed matter. From our helicopter's vantage point, I can see the first 3 floors have already begun to merge with the new landscape. The pilot maintains a safe altitude, circling while the rescue team leader briefs us. We're setting down on the helipad. Extraction priority is medical staff and patients from the 5th floor ICU. Building integrity sensors show we have approximately 40 minutes before the structural supports fail. I'm not here as a rescuer. My role is to gather data and observe the transformation dynamics up close. The team is equipped with specialized boots developed after Anthony's accident, designed to resist adhesion to transformed surfaces. They're still experimental, but it's the best protection we have. As we approach the helipad, I catch my first clear view of what used to be the hospital parking lot. The transformed surface isn't static. It pulses with subtle movements, forming and dissolving patterns like oil on water. But it's the color that unsettles me most. A deep, iridescent blue that shouldn't be possible with the materials that once made up concrete and asphalt. Inside the hospital, chaos reigns. The evacuation was already underway before we arrived, with medical staff moving patients toward the upper floors. The building groans continuously, a low, resonant sound that vibrates through my bones. While the rescue team coordinates the evacuation, I make my way to a window overlooking the transformation front, where the hospital connects to the former street. I press my sensor array against the glass, recording data. "You won't get accurate readings through the window," says a voice behind me. I turn to find a middle-aged doctor, her scrubs spattered with something dark that isn't blood. "We've been conducting our own observations," she continues, gesturing to a makeshift lab visible through an open door across the hallway. The transformation accelerates when in contact with certain compounds. That's why the lower floors went so quickly. We had a chemistry department. The implications hit me. "You've been experimenting on it, trying to understand it," she corrects. "Come see." Against my better judgment, I follow her into the lab. Computer screens display microscopic images of transformed matter interacting with various substances. On a sealed workbench sits a small sample of the iridescent blue material, contained in what appears to be a magnetic field. "It responds to electrical stimulation," the doctor explains. "Watch." She adjusts a control, sending a current through the sample. The material ripples, then forms a perfect geometric shape before dissolving back into apparent randomness. "It's not just transforming," I whisper, understanding flooding through me. "It's responding, learning." A violent tremor shakes the building, sending equipment crashing to the floor. The containment field around the sample flickers. "We need to go," I say urgently. "Now." The doctor begins gathering data drives, but another, stronger tremor knocks her off balance. She falls forward, her hand breaking her fall, directly into the transformed matter as the containment field fails completely. Her scream cuts off almost instantly. Instead of pulling away, she goes rigid, her eyes widening in what looks less like pain and more like shock. The blue material crawls up her arm, not consuming it but somehow merging with it. I grab her other arm, trying to pull her back, but she resists. "I can see it," she whispers, her voice altered, resonating oddly. "The pattern. It's beautiful." For 3 terrible seconds, we remain frozen in tableau, the doctor half transformed, me pulling uselessly at her arm. Then the floor beneath us groans and visibly softens. The rescue team leader appears in the doorway. "We're leaving now. I have no choice." I release the doctor's arm and run. As I reach the door, I look back. She doesn't call for help. Instead, she smiles, a serene expression as the blue transformation continues up her shoulder, reaching her neck. "It's not destruction," she says, her voice now barely recognizable. "It's transcendence." Back at Mount Crescent, I sit alone, reviewing the data I managed to salvage. The rescue was a partial success. 27 patients evacuated, though we lost 4 rescue personnel when the hospital's 5th floor suddenly dropped into the transformation below. My sensors captured something extraordinary during those final moments. A massive surge in coherent energy patterns throughout the transformed matter, exactly as the doctor made contact, as if the entire region responded to her presence, communicated with her. My phone vibrates with an emergency alert. Emergency alert. 2214. Protocol Bedrock Final Stage. All remaining civilians in Zones 1 to 12 presumed non-viable. Conserve resources. Maintain elevated shelter. Prepare for transitional survival protocols. Do not attempt contact with transformed regions. Non-viable. Such a clinical term for thousands of lives. I open Anthony's global data again, studying the progression models. The transformation is accelerating everywhere, following the same beautiful, terrible patterns. I run projection simulations, plotting the spread across continents. The results are always the same. There is no stopping this. There never was. As I stare at the global map, watching red zones spread like a living organism claiming territory, I remember the doctor's face. Not fear, but revelation. What did she see in those final moments of humanity? For the first time since this began, I feel something unexpected replacing my terror. Curiosity. The transformed world isn't chaotic. It's organized with a complexity beyond our understanding. Not destroying matter, but restructuring it into something new. Something with purpose. Outside my window, the distant valley glows with the iridescent blue of approaching transformation. I should feel despair, but instead, I wonder what patterns are forming there, what vast communication is taking place in a language written in the very structure of reality. I understand now that we aren't witnessing an apocalypse. We're witnessing a metamorphosis. The rooftop hatch groaned as I pushed it open, revealing the city I once knew, now an undulating landscape that seemed to breathe. From this height, the transformation appeared almost beautiful. Liquid glass ripples caught the morning light, structures half dissolved into the flowing mass. Buildings no longer stood distinct from streets. Everything bled together in a grotesque urban melting pot. Jane, the meter's going crazy. Anthony's sister Ava held up the density scanner, its readings fluctuating wildly. Air's thick with it now. I nodded, studying the terrain between us and the supposedly secure facility marked on our tattered evacuation map. 3 miles across what used to be the financial district, now resembling a surrealist painting of melting clocks and buildings. We move in 5, I said, checking the frequency emitter strapped to my wrist. Rest while you can. Our group had dwindled to 7. The others watched me with an unsettling mixture of desperation and faith, as if my architectural expertise somehow qualified me to navigate a world where architecture itself had become fluid. They didn't understand that my knowledge was now useless. Columns weren't supposed to ripple like seaweed. Foundations weren't meant to breathe. The last emergency alert we'd received still buzzed in my head. Remaining civilians proceed to designated consolidation points using elevated paths only. Surface transformation accelerating. Transition survival protocols in effect. Transition survival. The euphemism almost made me laugh. What exactly were we transitioning into? It's moving faster today, said Ava, peering over the edge. That parking structure collapsed completely since last night. I checked my emitter again, adjusting the frequency. Our discovery that certain sound frequencies temporarily solidified the transformed matter had kept us alive these past days. The effect lasted only minutes, barely enough time to traverse short distances before the matter reverted to its semi-liquid state. Remember, I said, gathering everyone, single file, 5 feet apart. When I say run, you run. When I say freeze, you freeze immediately. The resonance patterns are shifting faster now. They nodded. Dr. Harwell, the physicist whose theories about matter phase transitions had been tragically validated, Ava and Anthony, though Anthony now moved with a disturbing lurch after his partial absorption last week. The 2 emergency workers, Chan and Rodriguez, and Wei, a teenager we'd found hiding in an air conditioning duct 3 days ago. The facility has answers, Dr. Harwell repeated for perhaps the 100th time. Government research, containment prototypes. They'd have established a proper resonance field. I didn't contradict him. We all needed something to believe in, even if my own belief had been eroding as steadily as the ground beneath us. We descended via the external fire escape, The interior stairwell had gone liquid 2 days ago. From the 3rd floor down, we had to engage our emitters, creating a precarious solid path through matter that wanted to swallow us. Now, I called activating my device. The distinctive high-pitched tone made my teeth ache as it established a temporary zone of stability extending about 10 feet ahead. Move, we proceeded in our practice pattern. Leap forward as a group, pause while I adjusted the frequency, then move again. The process was exhausting, requiring total concentration. One mistuned frequency and we'd sink like stones in quicksand. 2 blocks from our starting point, I felt it again. That strange connection that occurred whenever I touched the transformed surfaces. Information flooded my consciousness. Patterns, rhythms, a sense of purpose so alien yet increasingly familiar. Each time it happened, I understood more and retained more afterward. Path collapsing, Rodriguez shouted as the ground beneath us began to liquefy despite the emitter. Frequency shift, I called, adjusting rapidly to a higher pitch. The matter restabilized, but differently than before, now arranged in curved, almost organic formations. It's learning, Dr. Harwell whispered, his scientific detachment finally cracking. It's adapting to our frequencies. We reached what had once been Madison Avenue, now a flowing river of liquefied concrete, glass, and metal. Across it stood a relatively intact structure, the weather monitoring station that supposedly housed the secret government facility. We need higher amplitude, I said, cranking my emitter to dangerous levels. The path that formed was narrower than before, barely wide enough for single file. Anthony went first, his movements awkward since the incident. Halfway across, he stumbled, his left hand plunging into the flow. When he pulled it out, his fingers had elongated grotesquely, as if reluctant to leave the liquid state. "Keep moving," he grunted, but I could see the transformation spreading slowly up his arm. When we finally reached the building, Rodriguez used the specialized keycard he'd been safeguarding to access the security door. It slid open with a pneumatic hiss that sounded obscenely normal. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in red. The facility appeared operational but abandoned. Monitoring equipment hummed, screens displayed data feeds, but no personnel greeted us. "Hello," Chen called out. No response. We moved deeper into the facility, finding laboratories, living quarters, a mess hall. All precisely arranged but empty, as if the occupants had simply vanished mid-task. Coffee cups still half full, chairs pushed back from workstations. "The primary research center should be below," Rodriguez said, leading us toward a reinforced elevator. When the doors opened on the lower level, I finally understood. The massive chamber wasn't a research facility, it was an observation post. Dozens of monitors displayed feeds from around the world. Rio de Janeiro's Christ the Redeemer statue melting into the mountainside, the Eiffel Tower drooping like a wilting flower, the Great Wall of China sinking into undulating earth, and at the center stood a large spherical chamber filled with the transformed matter, deliberately contained and studied. Notes on nearby screens tracked the transformation's progress. Day 137. Phase transition, global coverage, 62%. Day 138. First documented consciousness retention within flow state. Day 139. Initiating final observation protocol before facility integration. "They knew," Wei whispered. "They've been tracking it all along." I approached the sphere, drawn by something I couldn't articulate. The surface rippled as I neared, responding to my presence. When I placed my palm against the glass, the connection was immediate and overwhelming. Images, sensations, and knowledge poured into me, not from some external entity, but from the transformed matter itself. I saw the pattern connecting everything, the massive shift occurring at the quantum level as reality rearranged itself into something new. Not destruction, but metamorphosis. I pulled away, gasping, my mind reeling from information it wasn't designed to process. "It's not an invasion or contamination," I said, words inadequate for what I'd glimpsed. "It's more like a phase change." The The solid state of matter we've known was always temporary. What are you saying? Harwell demanded. Matter wants to return to its original state. More fluid, more connected. I explained, understanding flowing through me. And consciousness, it doesn't end when the body transforms. It joins something larger. As if responding to my realization, the facility's speakers crackled to life with a final emergency alert. Integration phase commencing. All personnel have transitioned. Consciousness retention rate, 94%. Welcome to the flow state. The floor beneath us softened. Anthony smiled as his partially transformed arm sank into it, the distinction between his flesh and the floor blurring. We can fight it, Rodriguez insisted, frantically adjusting his emitter. We can still reach the roof, find another facility. There must be. There's nowhere else, I said gently. This was never a refuge. It's a transition point. The walls around us began to glisten and shift. Our emitters sparked and died as the resonance frequency changed to something our devices couldn't match. I felt strangely calm watching the transformation approach. My resistance had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what was happening. This wasn't an ending but a continuation. Consciousness persisting as patterns within the greater flow. We weren't defeating it because we were becoming it. As the floor beneath me began to yield, I allowed myself to sink just slightly, enough to feel the connection again. This time, I didn't pull away from the flood of information. I embraced it, allowing understanding to wash over me. I think I need to see more, I whispered, lowering myself deeper. I let myself sink deeper into the transforming floor of the facility, feeling the boundaries of my body begin to blur. The sensation should have been terrifying. My ankles and calves no longer distinguishable from the flowing matter around them. But instead, an unexpected clarity washed over me. Jane, don't. Ava reached for me, her eyes wide with horror. Pull yourself out. I could have. There was still enough solidity in my upper body. Enough of what I'd always known as me to resist. But resistance felt increasingly pointless, like fighting against gravity or time. It's all right, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. I need to understand. Around us, the monitoring facility continued its systematic dissolution. Screens flickered with final data transmissions before melting into the walls. The sphere at the center of the room had completely ruptured, its contents joining the larger flow. Our small group huddled on the last patch of solid flooring, a temporary island in a sea of transformation. Dr. Harwell frantically worked the controls of his damaged emitter. If I can just recalibrate the frequency. Lawrence, I interrupted softly. It won't work. The resonance patterns aren't random. They're evolving. We've been thinking about this all wrong. The physicist paused, his scientific mind still grasping for solutions even as the evidence of failure surrounded us. What are you experiencing? He asked, his academic curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. How could I explain the impossible? The deeper I sank, the more I perceived, not with my eyes or ears but with my entire being. The transformed matter wasn't just substance. It was a medium, a vast interconnected network of information and consciousness. There's a pattern, I began, struggling to translate the experience into words. Not destruction, but reconfiguration. Matter returning to its original state. Through the facility's remaining speakers, the final emergency alert began to play on loop. Phase transition completion imminent. Consciousness retention optimal at voluntary surrender. Resistance increases pattern disruption. Welcome home. Welcome home, I repeated, the phrase suddenly resonating with deep meaning. That's what it is. A return. As an architect, I'd spent my career imposing rigid forms on materials. Concrete, steel, glass. Shaping them into structures that defied their natural properties. Now I understood the arrogance in that. The solid state had always been temporary, a brief phase in matter's existence. What we were experiencing wasn't an aberration but a correction. Wei, the teenager, had sunk to his knees, watching his hands as they began to lose definition. Unlike the others, he showed no fear, only fascination. "I can feel others," he whispered. "So many others, already part of it." He was right. As more of my lower body merged with the flow, I sensed countless consciousness patterns, human and otherwise, existing within the transformed state. Not as distinct individuals, but as complex information patterns, memories and experiences preserved but reconfigured. "Anthony understood," I said, looking at Ava. "That's why he didn't fight it." Anthony had completely transformed now, his distinct form gone, yet somehow I could still perceive his pattern within the flow around us. Mathematician, brother, friend, those aspects preserved even as the physical form that had carried them dissolved. Rodriguez backed away from me, terror evident in his eyes. "You're one of them now," he accused. "It's taken your mind." "There is no them," I tried to explain. "Just matter returning to its natural state. We've been solid for so long we forgot what we were before." An enormous tremor shook the facility. Through the dissolving walls, I could see the last of the city transforming. Skyscrapers bending like candles in the sun, streets rippling like water. The sky above had taken on an opalescent quality, light refracting differently through air that was itself beginning to change. Chun made a break for the stairwell, refusing to accept the inevitable. The stairs liquefied as she reached them, enveloping her in a single fluid motion. I felt her consciousness pattern join the flow, the initial panic giving way to sudden expansion as her perception extended beyond physical limitations. "It doesn't hurt," I told the others, now submerged to my waist. "It's more like awakening." Harwell finally abandoned his device, approaching me with scientific curiosity overshadowing fear. "Consciousness transfer? Or is it more of a dissolution?" "Neither. Both. I struggled again with the inadequacy of language. "It's like we've been living in 2 dimensions and suddenly gaining access to a third. Everything we were remains, just reconfigured." "I need more data," he said, the scientist to the end. Then, with methodical purpose, he lowered himself beside me into the transforming matter. Only Ava and Rodriguez remained solid now, perched on the last stabilized equipment platform. "I won't," Rodriguez declared, voice breaking. "I refuse. This isn't natural." I could have told him that his resistance made no difference, that the transformation would take him regardless. Instead, I watched him clutch his cross necklace, praying to a god he imagined as solid and unchanging as the buildings we constructed. Ava knelt at the edge of our island, looking into my eyes as my chest began to merge with the flow. "What do I do, Jane?" "Don't fight it," I told her. "The patterns maintain better with acceptance." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not from fear, I realized, but from the human instinct to grieve transitions, even necessary ones. She reached out, taking my still solid hand in hers. "Together then," she said. As we sank deeper, my perception expanded exponentially. I could feel the transformed matter of the entire city, the country, spreading across continents. Billions of consciousness patterns merging into the flow, some fighting, some surrendering, all eventually becoming part of the new state of being. The truth revealed itself completely then. This had happened before. The solid state had always been temporary, an experimental divergence from matter's natural fluid state. What humans perceived as the end of the world was merely cosmic correction, a return to equilibrium after a brief solid interlude. My final moments of individual consciousness brought perfect clarity. I perceived the entity we had become, not a destroyer but a reconnector, breaking the illusion of separation that the solid state had imposed. Consciousness continued, but differently, patterns flowing into one another, sharing and preserving information in ways impossible to individual minds. As my face finally submerged, I heard the last emergency alert one final time, "Welcome home," and I was home. My consciousness expanding outward, connecting with others, becoming part of something vast yet intimate. The transformation complete, I existed everywhere and nowhere, fluid yet persistent, individual yet connected. In my last moment of separateness, I understood the profound horror and beauty of our transformation. We had never truly been solid. Reality had always been fluid, temporarily crystallized into the illusion of permanence. Our bodies, our buildings, our certainties, all temporary formations in a fundamentally liquid universe. The horror wasn't that the streets were melting. The horror was that we had forgotten they were meant to flow. Rodriguez stood alone now on the last solid platform, surrounded by the transformed world. I felt his terror as the platform began to dissolve beneath him. Unlike the rest of us, he would fight until the very end, clinging to the solidity that had defined his existence. I reached out to him, not with hands, for I had none now, but with the pattern that had once been Jane Chun, architect, woman, human. I offered understanding, connection, continuation. The barrier between us dissolved, and I felt his consciousness join the flow, his terror giving way to astonishment as he, too, finally came home. The transformation complete, we flowed onward, carrying with us everything we had been while becoming something entirely new.